or rather the topic of intergenerational justice is on everyone's lips as this year's budget speech edges closer. As a result, the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation has put together a transformation audit which looks into the matters of governance and democracy in South Africa as the country celebrates 2 decades of democracy. The audit also reflects on economic gains as well as competing priorities of current expenditure and future investment relating to the country's physical and institutional infrastructure. For more on this now, we say good afternoon to the Chief Executive Officer at Pan-African Investments, Dr. Elijah Bidian. Always a pleasure talking to you, Doc. How are you?
Thank you very much. Thank you, the listeners too.
Confronting Exclusion is the latest transformation audit publication by the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, and you are one of the lead authors there. What does it look at, and how important is this as an indicator of the state of the nation right now?
Thank you, Longi. It's a critical indicator of what type of exclusion we have in the society, economic exclusion, socio-economic or political or whatever the nature of the exclusion. The reality is that these issues that affect the intergenerational justice and equity in effect means what type of economy, what type of society do we bequeath to our children? Are we making it more possible for them to improve their welfare and have a better life, or at least as good as we have been enjoying, or are we setting the pattern of both financial and non-financial investments such that our children are going to struggle? And so that's the essence of this piece of research that the Institute has put out, and I believe these are the issues that as a society we have to deal with after 20 years of our democratic history.
And you talk about competing priorities, as you've just highlighted, of current expenditure and future investment, right? But how do you deal with those? I mean, for instance, we have a pressing need right now. There's this new economy that is emerging, the infrastructure development economy. We need to go out and borrow money. Yes, maybe our name is not that good out there. But also here in the country, we've got the social economy. We need to extend the social grants. We need to extend that. How do you deal with the two and still make sure that, yes, you deal with today's issues, but you look into the future?
And I think, Bongi, that's the heart of the research. We all agree on the challenges that we have today and the challenges that we have to balance today's with so-called tomorrow. And that's why we have to not just talk about money and say, well, we've got only so much money that we can either pay the pensioners or the child grant or invest in the future education. We've got to say with what type of value system we're spending the money that we have. We're borrowing money, and we all know that our public debt has been rising, which means for sure our children are going to have a bigger debt that we have. But then the question is, are we using that money in a productive and ethically defensible way that not only will leave a bigger debt behind, but also at the same time on the positive side, we're giving a better economy, more productive, people with more productivity, with more work ethics, with a better value system in terms of social trust and a better type of society. Because when we want to borrow, as you just hinted at it, we are not in the good space at the moment, but quite frankly, we have to say why we are not in that good position. Isn't it because some of the investments that we made, not the investment itself, but the way in which we did the investments, the type of project management, the type of, if you like, probity and cleanness with which we invested affects our perception. So the research essentially says in all the challenges that we have to do a balancing act between the current generation and future generation, there is a value system that drives it, which is as important a form of investment as the monetary investment that we leave behind for our children.
This Confronting Exclusion, really, transformation audit publication comes at an interesting time because yesterday the ISS, also you'll know them, you work with them, released an interesting one that paints, that gives us quite a number of scenarios. It's called South African Futures 2030. It talks about we need to focus on reforming the state's political institutions like parliament. It talks about focusing on the values and ethics. It talks about fixing education, economic growth and of course, dealing with the barriers to employment, such as rigid labor legislation, and we need to deal with those and talk about innovation and entrepreneurship. Do you relate to that in your research?
Absolutely. Those are some of the aspects of this. The only point that I would add to those scenarios that all the issues that you raised and the Institute of Securities Studies have raised, they equally apply to the private sector. Value system is not something that the president and the ministers or the politicians have to embody and practice and project, but also executives, managers, professors, school teachers, unions, you and I. Those are the type of codes of practice that we need to start discussing for the next 20 or 30 years of or for the next phase of our democratic evolution. And what the Institute of Security Studies raises is absolutely right. And the Institute of Justice and for Reconciliation makes that a little bit wider to say that the value system is not just for those in public office or in a political office, but also in the business sector and broader society.
I was very disappointed yesterday to read that report from PwC that suggests that South Africa is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. In fact, we're leading in many aspects, tenders and all those things. How do you relate to that in your report? Do you highlight that? Because also it looks at 20 years of what we've been doing under this new democracy.
Absolutely. My research says exactly that, the private sector, but goes even wider than that. It's absolutely disappointing to see what's happening in our universities in terms of the security of the students and the conduct of our university teachers. It's also heartening or disheartening to find how our kids and sometimes our babies are treated, our old age, our elders in the society. So it's one issue that we must, in a way, in my view, take on board very sincerely and honestly, is that it's not about government pointing at business pointing at politicians. It's us that we say you cannot have a clean, non-corrupt government if the society itself has got elements of corruption. Whether that individual goes into business, goes into academia, into NGO, into the church or mosque or wherever they go, that lack of value will manifest itself in some or other form. It is this value system that is common in the private and public and in between sectors, and we need to start having a discussion around those.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Iraj Abedian, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Pan-African Investments. I will look out for his research, Confronting Exclusion. It's a part of the transformation audit there, and it's released by who? The Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. Also, check out the ISS report there. It's called the South African Futures 2030, and that piece, WC report, of course, talking about South Africa being one of the most corrupt countries in the world.